Hello there, people of the internet. Little thought experiment that I was just working on, and I figured while I'm over here thinking about this, I'll put up a camera. I was literally just kind of working on this in the back of my head, thinking to myself, what would and would not be best for what it is that I want to do. So, let me run some things past you guys. We all want to shoot as much as possible for the least amount of money as possible. We want to be able to send a lot of lead for really cheap. A lot of people do this by just using 22 long rifle. I'm not a big fan of 22 long rifle. I just don't like the lack of power that it has to offer, especially for the cost. I know that they're relatively inexpensive, but I mean, for 5 cents per shot, I can make some much more impressive stuff. So, in terms of what it is that I want and what it is that I'm looking for, I want something that is relatively powerful. Doesn't have to be the most powerful thing out there, but I want something that is relatively powerful. And I want it to not be very expensive, and I want it to use a very small amount of resources, typically resources that I can renew, typically resources that I can get back up and going for not a lot of money. So, if you guys watch this channel for any real length of time, you guys know that I reload my own primers. I use match heads typically. It's a 75% mix of match head per 25% mix of striker box. Then that makes match head powder. You then take that powder, and I mix mine with like you grind it into a real fine dust, but I mix mine with a little bit of 90% isopropyl alcohol to like turn it into a paste, and then I use that to refill my primers, and that works exceptionally well. That is typically how I reload my primers, and I can reload quite a few primers for not a lot of money. Like, whenever I go out and I get one of those big old boxes of match heads, I can reload probably a good 500 primers with that box, and that box is, what, $2 or $3 down at the local Walmart, give or take. I guess it depends on where it is that you're at and whatnot. But bottom line, it's not very expensive. And with primers, you can pretty much reload those things indefinitely. It takes a lot to wear out a primer. So that's definitely the way to go. Takes a little bit of time, I understand that, but that's definitely the way to go if you are looking to save money and get a lot of rounds downrange. A couple of bucks on a box of matches, there you go. Now the next one, I make my own gunpowder. I make both black powder and smokeless powder, and I've made videos on how I make both. That being said, for the most part, I buy what I need to make black powder, but I do have what I need set up in the event that I need to produce my own materials for making black powder, and I know that it works because I've used it before. So basically, any kind of nitrate form would work, potassium nitrate. If you have access to any kind of manure or any kind of, say, chickens or pretty much anything that is a bodily waste that would contain nitrates, you have access and ability to make yourself a nitrate farm. And with that nitrate farm, you then purify the nitrates, typically with hot water to dissolve the nitrates, and then you filter it out, and then you evaporate all of the water, and you're left over with nitrate crystals. Grind that into a fine powder, use that to make your black powder. That's a really good, easy, simple way to be able to make black powder. The issue is nitrate farms, they take a long time, and you gotta constantly maintain them, so I just bite the bullet. I go out and I buy what I need to make my black powder. All of that being said, I can make black powder for probably like, oh, I don't know, rough guesstimation, $3 a pound. Probably a little less than that, but I'd say about $3 a pound. And I can get a lot of rounds off with $3 a pound. One of my main go-to cartridges for black powder is 308. And I go to 308 because I can fit a fair amount of my powder into it and get really decent results with what it is that I use. So with 308, I typically shove about 60 grains of powder inside that thing. I know a lot of people, if you try filling up the black powder case, you're going to get to about 40 grains, and then you're going to be like, oh no, it's not going to fit. You compress the powder inside of that thing till you get 60 grains, and there's a couple of different ways that you can do that, but that's kind of beyond the scope of my video. If I wanted to, I could just use 40 grains. That would be just fine for plinking, but I'm looking for something that is going to be relatively powerful, so I bumped the charge up to about 60 grains. Now, in terms of the lead that I use, I typically use wheel weights. Wheel weights are not the hardest of lead alloys, but they're not exactly soft lead either. Is my battery dying? Oh my goodness, my battery is dying. Let's see how far I can get with this. But my wheel weights, they do pretty well. Now, normally with wheel weights, you don't really want to push them past, say, 1,400 feet per second is probably the limit. But I typically put a gas check on the back of my bullets, especially if I'm running smokeless powder, but in this particular case, we're talking about the cheapo black powder that I make. But my black powder, whenever I compress it into a 308 case, I probably hit around 1,700 feet per second with the particular bullets that I use. And in an effort to conserve lead, I use 130 grain projectiles. That is just with all of the different 308 rifles that I have and the twist rates that I use, I've already done a bunch of math. I've made several videos about what it is that I'm doing and why it is that I'm doing it. A 130 grain bullet just yields itself to being really, really, really optimal with all of the different twist rate rifles that I have in the 30 cal range. Not only that, but it's also a nice lightweight projectile that can move relatively quickly with black powder, and it utilizes a small amount of resources. Like, for example, with that 130 grain bullet, if I were to have 2 of those, I would have 2 shots of ammo versus, like, say, 1 single 220 grain bullet. Now, the ratios aren't quite exact with that particular one. We would need like a 260 grain bullet, but pretty gosh darn close. My bottom line is that I could use that same amount of lead to get far more shots with a 130 grain bullet than I could with that 220 grain bullet that I know a lot of people run if they go shooting black powder. Because black powder only propels projectiles at certain velocities. It has a velocity limitation, and you can't really run projectiles faster than the black powder velocity limitations. It just doesn't really lend itself all that well to being able to pull that off. Black powder is an explosive, not a propellant, so it can only move things so fast. So in order to have more power in your cartridge, you increase the weight of the bullets. However, that being said, I'm trying to get something that is relatively capable for the least amount of resources possible. That is a big thing for what it is that I'm trying to do here, because I like going out to the range and just joy shooting and blinking, and I really don't want to burn through all my stuff, which is why I'm trying to use as few resources as possible, but still get as much effect on target as possible. And that 130 grain bullet definitely does that. Now, the reason why I'm sticking with 30 cal and not using something like a 5.56, which would be a significantly lighter weight bullet, your 30 cal rounds are just ideal and perfect for cast rounds that are being launched at the velocities that black powder is able to produce. With the 5.56, your 55 grain round, you can't really fire that at faster velocities than, say, 1,800 feet per second, especially with black powder, and black powder fouling builds up really, really quickly inside small bores. I've already made videos about me testing out black powder 223. It just does not work all that well. But not only that, but you got a 55 grain bullet moving not very fast. Like, it's just not going to be that effective of a round. 5.56 gets its effectiveness from velocity. Well, if you go and take that velocity away and you don't add more weight to that bullet, then you're not going to get very good results. Now, you could add more weight to that bullet, but having like an 85 grain 5.56, that's a heavy, heavy little bullet for 5.56. That does not mean that it is a heavy bullet. Like an 85 grain bullet for a 30 cal rifle is stupidly lightweight. So it's a middle ground that I'm trying to find here. And I think legitimately black powder 308 with a 130 grain bullet, I think that legitimately is the best way to go. especially with my reloaded primers, homemade powder. I could get some fairly decent power. It's not exactly full power 308, but I could get some fairly decent power out of that cartridge with that particular loading, and I could get a lot of them because 308 is abundant and cheap. Like the brass for 308 is abundant and cheap, and you can find it very readily. It's very available. That is a really good option. As a matter of fact, I might just stack myself 1,000 rounds of that and call it a day. I got a couple of different kinds of powder that I'm actually testing out right now, and I'm going to see what is going to be the most effective. And I'm probably going to end up loading a bunch of 308 with that particular powder. I'm excited. Video's coming soon on that. But anyway, I was just over here brainstorming. I wanted to put up a video on it just because I was over here brainstorming, talking to myself, thinking what it was that I wanted to do and how I was going to achieve it. So thanks for watching, folks. I appreciate your time. Like, subscribe, share. Description below has a link to all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. You guys go off. Have yourself a fantastic day. I'll see you in the next episode.
Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.